Hey, welcome back, guys. So this is the second part of the creative strategy module. In the first lecture, we looked at the first three objectives you see there. So creativity and advertising and how the two relate. We talked about how it's not just enough to be fresh, novel, and original, but there always has to be that relevance that helps the client solve their problems. The second objective was the creative process that we took you through, that 5-step process. And the third objective was the creative brief that we looked at in terms of trying to establish some of those objectives in terms of advertising objectives, but also how you might want to bring that creative strategy to life in terms of outlining your campaign themes and the appeals and executions that you hope to enact in your creative strategy when working on a client brief. Today we're going to finish off this creative strategy module by looking at the 6 types of creative strategies that are commonly used, and finally how to assess creative work, both how industry assesses creative work that agencies submit for client approval, but also how we will judge the work that you submit as part of your group project. So the 6 main types of creative strategies are seen here. They fall under 3 broad orientations, or 3 angles as I like to call them. So the first angle is a functional angle, and within that you have the creative strategy of a USP, so that's a unique selling proposition. Then the second broad category is symbolic and experiential approaches to creative strategies, and within that you have 3 different sub-strategies of brand image, resonance, and emotional strategies. And then the final orientation is category dominance. And within that you have 2 specific types of sub-creative strategies of a generic strategy and a preemptive strategy. So we're going to go through all those 6 creative strategies, and I'm going to go through it once again by way of a multi-choice sort of question, while at the same time explaining why a particular answer is the most appropriate. So the first strategy we look at through this multi-choice question is as follows. The unique selling proposition strategy is a something advertising strategy, right? So we already know from looking at the previous slide that it was the only option available under the functionally orientated strategies. And so the way the unique selling proposition works, it's quite simple. You have to try and figure out through the creative process what the most unique selling proposition is of your client's product or service, and then that is the strategy that you will use through your advertising and promotional campaign. A good example of this is Uber. So a unique selling proposition, or a USB of Uber when it first came out, was that it was much cheaper than taxis, full stop, right? And because it was much cheaper than taxis, that was the main thing that made it so popular. Now, obviously, there's many other different ways you could promote Uber, such as it's a more user friendly platform perhaps, and you could also promote it based on the sharing economy or those sorts of concepts, but for the most part the unique selling proposition at one particular time, particularly early on in Uber's introduction, was that you could get these taxi equivalent service offerings at a fraction of the price. The second question we're going to look at is this. The advertisers that design the Mountain Dew commercials, so that's a brand of soft drink, the advertisers that design the Mountain Dew commercials portraying the soft drink as a hip and outrageous brand use the something strategy. So the answer to that, if you're thinking about Mountain Dew and the crazy ads they come up with trying to really portray the type of people that might use that brand, is a brand image strategy, right? So it's really building up the brand. For an example closer to home, we have Tui. The Tui beer brand, which is a very famous brand in New Zealand, has a similar brand image sort of creative approach. So their brand advertisements are always based on sort of a cheeky style of persona that might use the brand, and it really tries to build this brand image of the brand being a little bit cheeky, a little bit fun compared to its competitors. So this type of transformational ad, which falls under the brand image symbolic orientation strategy, is that it's an ad that enhances that consumption experience in a way that would not be the same without the ad. So if you think about all the brand image type of ads that you might see that really build up the experience of using a brand, the way you approach the brand and the enjoyment you may get from using that brand would not be the same if it were not for the brand image building ads that precede your consumption of the brand. Right, and so this is advertising working in a pretty powerful way, because what we're saying there is that, if you take a beer brand like TUI, in a blind taste test, it might be very difficult to tell the difference between one type of beer brand versus another. But once you throw in the advertising that underlays the foundation of that brand image, it gives a whole new experience to that consumption. And so people that choose certain types of beer brands based on brand image will be enjoying that beer not only for the taste and its other functional attributes, but for the symbolism and the experience that the advertising enables or adds to that brand consumption experience. Another example of a brand that does this very well is Apple. So a lot of their traditional ads back in the day when they were really establishing their brand was all based around brand image. You might know of those famous Apple versus PC ads where you had the cool hip young guy as represented as the Apple brand, and then you had the kind of old dude with the glasses, kind of boring, representing the the PC brand. And so it's another good example of a brand image strategy, because it is using advertising to really build the brand image of Apple. And then the argument there is that when you're buying Apple, you're not only buying it because of its functional attributes, but also because of the brand image that that is portrayed through years and years of advertising. A closer example to home is this old Vegemite versus Marmite debate. So some would argue that when you see an ad portraying Vegemite or Marmite, that it is a functional approach, because the two products are quite different in terms of, as the loyal brand consumers would say, they taste very different, but also one is obviously more vegan friendly than the other. So there's a functional approach there that you could use to advertise Vegemite versus Marmite. But on the other hand, you can also take a brand image approach and really build up the difference between those two products. Now, I don't personally use either of those products too much, but I'm sure those that are really loyal to either Vegemite or those that are really loyal to Marmite will acknowledge that there might be some sort of brand image difference between those two products. They may also say that there are functional differences as well, such as taste and ingredients. And I guess the point of that example is to show that, across these different ways of advertising, they're not always mutually exclusive, right? Even though it's better to pick one, because then you have a very clear message and very clear communication objectives, it doesn't mean that there can't be functional attributes that do differentiate one brand from its competitors. But it's up to the advertising agency to decide which angle they're going to take. Are we going to push home the unique selling proposition in the case of Vegemite, that it's more vegan friendly, or are we going to take a brand image approach and try and build some sort of other relationship with the audience? So this third question here, the something strategy, extends from psychographic research and structures an advertising campaign to pattern the prevailing lifestyle orientation of the intended market segment. So what's the correct answer there? If you look at the textbook, or if you simply look at the grid that I've provided, you'll start to notice the pattern that we're going through. And the right answer for this is resonance. So resonance is about when frequencies align. So that's, I guess, the scientific idea of resonance, when waveforms or frequencies align. From an advertising perspective, it's when your brand clicks with the lifestyle of its target audience. So a good example of that is Lululemon, the yoga brand. So their advertising is very targeted to a specific type of person, predominantly young professional females, but also some males. But the resonance that they try to generate is that it's a mindful yoga hipster sort of brand. It's the same type of target audience that would more likely be vegetarian or vegan, definitely eat healthy, lead an active lifestyle, but not sort of hardcore marathon, outdoorsy sort of lifestyle, more of the mindful meditation yoga sort of lifestyle, right? And so the advertising around that really resonates with that very particular target market. Other examples are luxury brands. So a lot of them will also try to go on a resonance strategy. I've got the example here, Ferrari. So that the brand's advertisements promoting Ferrari would try to resonate with people that are, of a different demographic and of a different psychographic. So people that, really appreciate luxurious, high-end, but sporty automobiles. And so you could also argue that you could promote Ferrari through a unique selling proposition. So you could look at how fast the car is. You could promote it through brand image, which was the previous example we looked at. But in this particular example, I'm suggesting that resonance would be a really good way of promoting Ferrari, because you're targeting a very small percentage of the population, and if you're able to figure out their lifestyle preferences, then you can really match your advertising to appeal to that particular target audience. And what you want to do through your advertisements is to have your brand really click or resonate with your target market's lifestyle. The emotional strategy works especially well for, and you have some options below there. Does it work well for food, jewelry, cosmetics? And then we've got these ever popular options of none of the questions are correct, and also all of the questions are correct. So if we think about an emotional strategy, which is the final strategy within that middle category of creative strategies, looking at symbolic or experiential approaches, then an emotional strategy really works for all of the answers there, right? So food, jewelry, and cosmetics. And that's because it's based around hedonism, or appealing to people's desire to seek pleasure in life, to really enjoy life. So food, jewelry, cosmetics. And when I say food, usually it's things like chocolates or some sort of alcoholic beverage, something decadent, right? Ice cream is another good example. But you see the emotional strategy work on even the most basic of foods. It's those ads that you see where they show you slicing through a tomato and all the juices kind of coming out, or pouring gravy over a really nicely roasted lamb chop or something like that. So that's an emotional strategy, because it's really trying to make you feel something when you see that ad, and it works really well for those three categories because they're such pleasure invoking products. A side note in terms of multi-choice, you'll notice that the question below, all of the answers supplied for this question are correct, is the right choice. And in a previous lecture, I mentioned how you should not overthink multiple choice questions. And this is a great example here. If you were to overthink option E, then you would think that you can't pick it because one of the options in terms of all of the answers supplied includes option D, right? And so you might feel like you can't pick E because that would include D. So my advice is do not overthink multi-choice questions. Just go with your instinct. And if you're familiar with the content, then you would immediately know that food, jewelry, cosmetics is the right answer, and therefore E is the right answer. So an example here, taking a sort of more real-world approach, is Snickers. So that's a famous chocolate confectionery brand. They have a very famous ad campaign about how you are not you when you're hungry. That's an emotional strategy because it's causing you, it's a humor-based strategy, right? It's got a humor appeal, makes you laugh, and then it is relevant to the client because Snickers is positioned as a very substantial chocolate bar. It's full of nuts, it's quite rich, and so it's a real hunger buster, and that's the positioning that they've gone for. And they've used an emotional strategy because it also works well for chocolate and the idea of feeling hungry. So it's working on both humor as well as hunger. Tiffany & Co., so jewelry company. So this is another example of an emotional strategy. Every girl wants a little blue box, which is one of their slogans. So once again, this is promoting nothing unique about the jewelry manufacturer. So it's not a USP, unique selling proposition strategy. It's really building up that emotional affect. This feeling of want, of desire, of the wanting to give someone a gift that really makes them delighted. This question here, the something strategy is employed when an advertiser makes no attempt to differentiate its brand from or claim superiority over competitive offerings. Right, so this is a generic strategy, and it's the type of strategy you see when a commodity product typically wants to just increase the size of the market overall. So Zespri is a great example. If it promotes itself, it's often promoting kiwi fruit as the overall product to be sold, because it might be, saying that it's high in vitamin C, or it's got a lot of fiber, etc., etc. And the way that generic strategies work is that it increases the size of the pie. It makes the demand for the overall sector increase before it starts to carve up slices of that pie. Other examples of this might be something like eat lean red meat, or drink more milk, or a diamond is a girl's best friend. So all those examples there are just generic strategies that increase demand for either meat or milk or diamonds, and by increasing the size of that pie, then all the individual, competing brands can have a more successful platform for business. Another reason why you might employ a generic strategy is that you are the dominant brand in that market. So Zespri is the dominant kiwi fruit supplier for the world. Similarly, the diamond example, every girl's best friend, is one that was promoted by De Beers, who are the world's most dominant diamond supplier. So they can promote, they can take a generic strategy approach to promoting diamonds as a whole, because any demand in that sector would benefit them indirectly. The final strategy, the something, is employed when an advertiser makes a generic type claim but does so with an assertion of superiority. So the right answer here is preemptive. And this is when you are saying something about your brand and making it look like you own that something, but realistically everyone can make that same claim. But because you're doing it first, you become known for that, that claim. So a great example here is Lush. Right, so this is a soap retailer. They make a lot of these boutique sort of natural soaps and bath bombs. So they don't use any packaging, so they're more recyclable in a way. They use less packaging, and they're all into fair trade products, right? Biodegradable, sort of no chemicals, that sort of thing. Now you could argue that other companies like Body Shop could probably argue the same thing about trying to be more fair to the environment, using gentler products, opposing animal testing, all that sort of stuff. But Lush kind of goes out there and really stakes their claim as being sort of a very, very eco-friendly product. And so they own that. Apple is another good example that does this sometimes. So when they promote the fact that they use recycled aluminium, many other computer brands could probably claim the same thing. But because they come out and they say it first, and they've got such massive advertising power, that when they say that, it becomes almost like a unique selling proposition for them. But it is a preemptive strategy, because it is not that unique. Other people do the same thing, but because they're so well known and they come out and say that first, they become known for it. AMI, which is an insurance company, has this new campaign, which is the Kinder campaign. So it's all about being kinder to the client in times of need, because they're an insurance company. Now, if you think about it, any insurance company could have come out with that claim and added that as part of their, unique positioning strategy. They could have said, that we are also kind. But once one company comes out and says it, they own it. And if you try and do the same thing, you look like a copycat. And so that's a really good example of how it is a preemptive claim, because any insurance company could theoretically work on a kinder application claims process. But AMI has come out and staked that claim. And so they are now known for trying to be the kindest insurance company out there. So that's a really good example of a preemptive strategy. So in terms of assessing creative work, when creative work is, thought up and then presented, there will be sort of a judgment process that looks at, how successful this proposed creative work might be. So some of the questions we look at, both from an industry point of view, but also how we will be approaching your group work, is whether the ad is consistent with the broader marketing objectives of the company. So if you recall in the advertising objectives sub-lecture, we talked about how advertising objectives have to be in line, internally consistent with what the company is capable or wanting to deliver, right? So that's kind of a big picture sort of assessment. We look at the creative work and whether that matches what the company, where the company wants to go in the first place. Then we look at whether it's consistent with the communication objectives. So within your assignment brief, there'll be things like, creating awareness, for instance, or getting people to understand what the brand is about. Or there may be communication objectives in terms of, selling a certain number of products. So the creative work then must be in line with delivering on those communication objectives. Is the ad appropriate for the right target audience? So are you using the right techniques to speak to the right types of people that are in your target audience? So does it appeal to them? Would they understand the lingo, the strategy, the approach, the appeals that you've used? Or does it go over their head? Have you pitched it a little bit too, have you tried to be too clever, too sophisticated? Or are you downplaying it too much and you're insulting them by being patronizing? So getting that right, getting the right tone and pitching it at the right level so that the target audience that you're targeting will actually understand it is very important. Does it deliver a clear message? Is it powerful, or does it get mixed up across the various channels that you're using? So we want it to break through the clutter and make it very persuasive. And in order to do that, you need a very clear, powerful message. Is overshadowing a problem? So I mentioned this in an earlier lecture about how if you go for an emotional strategy, sometimes if you try to make it too powerful and too creative and you don't keep in mind the importance of relevance to solving the client's problem, that you'll cause what's called overshadowing. And that means the creative component overshadows the brand message. And all people remember is the creative technique that you've used, or the story that you've told, or the emotion that they felt. But they won't actually remember what brand that the ad was actually talking about. Is it being launched in the right media? So in subsequent lectures, we'll look at the different media that you can use. But obviously, depending on the creative work, sometimes there are various media that work better in terms of delivering the creative message. And so you want to get that integrated in through the right channels. And finally, is it truthful and tasteful? So this is kind of part of that legal requirement. You can't be telling lies because you'll get in trouble for that and the ad will be withdrawn, or even worse, the client may be sued. And at the same time, in terms of being tasteful, you don't want to offend people, once again, because the ad can be withdrawn from the based on the Advertising Standards Authority. But also, you don't want to offend people just for the sake of getting their attention. Because sometimes some brands will suffer a lot more when they're seen as offensive. Other brands might be able to get away with it, but you want to shock people for the right reasons, not just for the shock value to grab their attention. So to summarize, we've got a couple of things that we looked at over these last two lectures. First, creativity consists of novelty and relevance. So that relevance part was the part that people usually forget about, but that's really important for solving the client's problems. We talked about the creative process and how it's unpredictable, but it can be fostered. So control the things that you can control, like how quickly you get to work on the background, how much you interact with your team to try and work through problems. The subconscious and the illumination part of the creative process is very difficult to control, but you can control then how how quickly you start to work, and also how you deal with various ideas that come out. Because it is subjective, it is important to have these objectives that you can agree on. So that is the creative brief, but also advertising objectives. Then we looked at the three broad ways to angle your advertising. So that was the functional perspective, the symbolic experiential perspective, and the category dominant orientation. And within those, we had those 6 creative strategies that we looked at today. And overall, a creative ad will break through that clutter and really help a client achieve their objectives. So next time we'll look at the various media that are available to deliver your creative ideas.